You're listening to In Sickness, a podcast about caregiving with Allison Breininger and Justin Bima. Good morning, Allison.
Hi, Justin.
How are you doing today?
Doing all right. Sean and I are packing up. We're going to Austin, Texas tomorrow. I know. It's the Fanconi Anemia Research Conference for adults, and which is a pretty niche group of people because, you know, there are not that many adults with this disease, although as research gets better, thanks to this organization, there are more adults. And so a couple years back, they started doing this conference, and we have gone a number of times. Obviously, the last couple of years have been online, but we've gone maybe 3-4 times. And it's just like days packed full of like scientific sessions about new research, and there are researchers there who do things like, okay, let me swab your cheek and all that stuff. There's support groups and all of that. And so we're going to that, which feels like a big deal because obviously it hasn't happened in a couple of years. But it's also super exciting because this time, you know, I coordinate with or collaborate with the Fanconi Anemia Research Fund. And so I have this time consulted with them to figure out how to make this conference caregiver friendly, because almost every adult brings a parent or a partner or a friend or somebody along. So there's going to be caregiver swag that I'm going to give out when they arrive. And then I get to lead 2 support groups and 1 education session, as well as facilitate a caregiver lunch while I'm there. So it feels really exciting, and also just a little daunting because, you know, like we did just go on a big trip, but this is another trip. And Maya and I have had colds for the last couple of weeks. And so I don't feel nervous about the actual presenting. I love that part so much, but just, you know, it's a big deal still traveling and it's an intense experience.
Right.
On
it
a
sounds
good
like
day.
it would, you've got a lot of activity packed into there. Plus I imagine like being around everyone who with Fanconi anemia, has difficult stories and experiences. And I know that it's a close-knit community from what you've shared. And that I imagine that there's an emotional component that's heavy as well, on top of everything else.
As well as the fact that every year when we go back, there are people who have passed away since the last meeting. And that feels really hard. So it's a lot, but we're getting ready. Got all the suitcases. We leave tomorrow. So that's kind of the big thing that's going on here. Yeah. How about you? What's going on over there?
Well, I've got just a few weeks left of my leave from work, which like has been really, really good for me mentally to have that space to kind of recover from just all of the stress and burnout and just mental health stuff that like work had kind of put me through. So I'm glad that I've had this space, but it just feeling the pressure of it, like wrapping up and needing to go back. And what is that going to feel like?
Yeah.
You know, is it going to jump back to feeling super stressed and burned out like right away? Or am I going to be able to navigate that and kind of find space to work at a better pace, or, you know, and how much of that is in my control versus out of my control? And just, it's hard not to, at this point, like start the questions in my mind start spinning up, and like the anxiety starts kind of running with that and playing out scenarios. And well, what if this, what should I do? So I'm trying to like push back against that a little bit, and just like, it's not time yet for me to deal with that. Like I still have weeks left, and let's use that time to continue to rest, continue to recover, continue to do things that are filling my bucket and bringing me joy. And so it's been, just trying to find that balance a little bit.
Yeah. How are you at that? Because I am terrible at that. Terrible.
I don't know. I'm not great at it, but I feel like through this break, I've been able to be pretty intentional about like getting out and doing things that are bringing me joy. And whether that's been fishing, whether that's been going out birding, whether that's just been going up into the mountains to sit or hike, going to the ocean to just be, I feel like I've been able to like be pretty intentional about making sure I'm doing more than just sitting around at home for 12 weeks. Because I don't know how helpful that would be from from the rest standpoint. There's that, but like, I don't know. that feels like time would just kind of be passing, and it's been good to be out and just kind of soaking in the beautiful world that's around me. And I find that really enriching. So,
well, just now I've been there, so I've seen it. But like when you're like, well, I could go fishing, I could go to the mountains, I could go to the ocean, I could go to here. It's like you live in an amazing place, and I'm so glad that you find that soul filling. I think, and we could probably do a whole episode on this, but just when you talked about rest, I struggle with that too, because I'm like, okay, rest means I should be sleeping, or I should be lying down. And like you said, like rest can be I'm out fishing, which feels like you're using physical energy, but also that's filling your bucket, Right. So yeah, that's a whole different topic. But yeah, speaking of topics, I'm super excited about what we're going to talk about today.
Oh, great.
Because today we're going to talk about the terrible and the wonderful things that people have said to us as caregivers. We did a little poll to our audience and asked people to share with us what were the most sort of like hurtful and insensitive things that people have said to them as caregivers, and also what are the most like lovely and supportive things. And people just like filled up our inboxes, which was great and also a little sad. You know that many people have had these experiences. I would say almost everybody had one of each.
Yeah.
And some people just thanked us for giving them a space to say it. Because a lot of them, you could tell they have been carrying this phrase around for a long, long time, and that it still holds.
Yep.
So they were just like, thank you for giving me a place to put this out there. So we have anything that we're going to share today is obviously anonymous, and we have permission from the people.
Yeah.
But we're just going to, I think it's important because as caregivers walking around in the world, it's so hard. And we don't have as many interactions as maybe we would want to. And then when we do, they're so important. And so for us to talk about things that have been said that have been hurtful so that we can all learn from them, because I think as listeners out there, you might hear us say something today and be like, oh, I've said that.
Yeah.
Right. And like my favorite Maya Angelou quote is something like, I think it's Maya Angelou, like do as best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better. So I think that's what we'll do today is like, if you hear something and you're like, oh shoot, I have said that to someone before, just say, okay, now I know. And if you feel like repair work needs to be done, you need to go back to that person. Okay. But the big thing is like, what can you say differently next time to that person or to somebody else in your life? So do you want to start off and maybe share a couple of the negative things that people shared with us? A couple quotes.
Yeah, I can do that. So yeah, we got a kind of a wide variety of things that people have said that had said to them that certainly are not the best things to say to someone who is going through a difficult time or a caregiver. One that really, really stuck out to me as something uniquely terrible. Are you sure she's sick and not just faking so you take care of her?
Oh.
And I mean, there's so many things with that are just make me angry, and because on the face of it, it's like someone is not believing your lived experience.
Yeah.
That the person you're caring for is actually sick and needs care, and is just dismissing that as like, that's off the board. And then suggesting that like, not just that it's not real, but that they are somehow doing it to manipulate you into doing stuff for them. And it's just like, why is that the turn that your mind takes?
Right.
Yeah.
I think about like, if any of us could, we would all choose a different path. Like none of us. This is the last thing that any of us wants to be doing. And for our person and for us. And so to imagine that like someone would just like pretend because it like, well, this looks so shiny that this is something they're going to make up. What?
Right. And I think when we are living with the pain and the struggle and just the like seeing what the person we're caring for is going through day in and day out, to like to have it suggested that that's not real, that's like that they are somehow faking that. It's just so like, I mean, it's deeply hurtful, and it's also just like so out of touch with like, do you even know what my life is and what my life is like?
It's so invalidating.
Yes.
You know, it's like the lack of acknowledgement and the lack of validation that we all crave. And it's just the opposite. And that's the kind of thing that's going to make a caregiver potentially go into their shell and be like, I'm not talking anymore. I'm not sharing any more of my story because I did. And this is what came back.
Yeah.
A couple other ones that were sort of like that. Someone said, your wife isn't that sick. She's just growing older.
Right.
What?
Yeah.
There's another one that, it's another one. I mean, this is a little bit different, but it's like, he's not sick enough, so he doesn't qualify.
Right.
I mean, that's a whole different, that's when we get into like the systems, right? He's not sick enough.
Right.
And so it's like, either it's like they're faking it or they're sick, but they're, like, man.
Yeah. Another one that's kind of in that vein is it could have been worse. And it's just like, okay, yeah, this situation could be worse, but it's also bad. And it's like, we're not here to compare our situations in that sense. It's yeah, the ones that do not validate, the ones that do not like acknowledge or minimize are really hurtful.
I think that it could have been worse. I mean, anything could have always been worse. Right.
Yeah. Right.
And I think we shared a different time. Somebody told me that their mother-in-law said to them, well, at least you're not in Ukraine.
Right.
Well, okay, that's true. But that doesn't mean that this is easy.
Yeah.
Somebody said once to a caregiver, you're not the one that's sick. So why are you complaining? What?
Yeah.
I mean, all of these things are like the antithesis of what I at the Negative Space and we on the In Sickness podcast are trying to do, which is to bring caregiving into the light and help people see it and feel supported. And these are the kind of things that just shut people right on down.
Yeah.
And which makes me so sad because I feel like so often caregivers, that's why they do go around potentially saying, I love it. It's great. Everything's fine. I'm fine. Because they've maybe said something once and somebody came back at them with one of these just awful phrases.
Right.
I think that sometimes people also say things that are well-meaning, but just really miss the mark. And so things like a number of people said that they hate it when people say, I don't know how you do it.
Right.
Or even good for you for staying with your partner. So many people would just leave. And I've gotten that kind of thing a lot. People saying like, you are like living out your wedding vows and you're just so amazing that and I mean, I guess, but it just feels like, I don't know how you do it. Or I have a friend who it bugs her so much when people say, I just can't imagine what your life is like. And that just really bugs her. And I mean, on the flip side, we don't want people to say, I can totally guess what your life is like. Right.
Right. But we also want them to put in a little bit of mental work and like, you can kind of imagine, like, some things about my life and could kind of picture why that would be challenging and why I'm struggling and why I'm overwhelmed and tired and like, And I don't know, because, we talk so much about validation and people do want validation, but there's something about like, I don't know how you do it that doesn't feel validating. Right.
I think it's supposed to, but it doesn't.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those phrases that is just, it doesn't feel like it's just sort of like a canned phrase, and it doesn't, it's just like a way to, I don't know, not necessarily maybe like to shut the conversation down or just to be like, well, I don't know how you do it. And just like not pushing for more, like not offering any understanding or it's just, it feels a little empty.
Yeah. Maybe that is I think you're right. That I think if it was one of these like, wow, I don't know how you do it. Is there anything you want to tell me about your experience that, or, if there was something with it, right? But I think you're right that it does seem kind of empty. Just like, whoa, I don't know how you do it.
Right.
Because how do we respond to that? Like, well, I don't either. I mean, people ask all the time. They ask, how do you do it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, what's the answer to that? I don't know.
I don't always feel like I am doing it.
Right.
Right.
You just have to.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. What are other like patterns or things that you saw as you looked at the submission?
I mean, there are some that kind of have a more like religious angle. Like there's one here, God doesn't give us more than we can handle. Like that's not helpful. Right. And so like I think like with religion, there are people who like it is a way that they try to make sense of, or it is a like that's how they're making sense of the world. And for them, having answers like brings them comfort. And like religion is a way that they can have answers for all of these, for life. And that's great. But like you and me and other caregivers, like our lives are just full of questions that do not have answers. And we live in this space where like things can't be wrapped up in a like neat bow or like made sense of. And so to get comments that come at it like, oh, you just need to pray more, or like maybe a miracle will happen, or like it feels like it's a way for them to minimize their discomfort with the fact that there are not answers for what we're facing. And so those comments just don't land well, at least for me, and can feel really hurtful because it's, it feels often like something is being said for the comfort of the person who's saying it because they're uncomfortable with the situation. And like, there's not a bridge that's trying to be made to like understand, to offer empathy, to offer support, to acknowledge that this is a difficult thing, that I don't know why this is happening. Like there's no answer. And I think that sometimes the person saying it has no idea, like for them, like their worldview, like that's this, and then there must be an answer here. And like, that's just, but it's so, it just feels such a distance away from like what our life actually is.
And I think you hit on something so important about how often when people say these things, they are trying to make themselves feel more comfortable.
Yes.
Right. I think that's a huge part. I do want to say that, I personally take a lot of comfort in faith.
Yeah.
And with that, knowing that there are things that are like, if someone said to me, if you just pray hard enough, Sean will get better. Right. I also know that's not how this works.
Right.
Right. I don't think that he is sick because we didn't pray hard enough.
Right. It's when something like that is said, it's like, okay, what is not being said in that statement,
Yeah. What's the opposite?
What's the implication?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And so, and there are people like, I think we hear a lot about thoughts and prayers.
Yeah.
Right. Which can also feel really empty. But I have friends who will say, I spent time this morning praying for you and Sean. And that feels really meaningful to me.
Right.
Or someone say like, I'm praying today that the right doctors are in your path or whatever, you know what I mean? So I think it's the sincerity and the seeing of your situation.
Yes. 100%.
Right. That makes that, because I think just like throwing off a glib sort of like, God won't give you more than you can handle. Off you go. It's supposed to like make me feel supported, which makes me feel like, what? So I think with all of these, it's about the context and the sincerity behind it. And like you said, if it's just, if there isn't, I love the way you said that, if there isn't a bridge, right, with it to connect to support and to seeing you and to acknowledging you, then it's empty.
Right.
Then it can feel empty. And so just sort of throwing a verse out or throwing a statement out without the rest of it can just feel like you don't really see me at all, do you? Yeah.
Yeah. Another category of things that kind of came through on these is people not saying anything.
Yeah.
Like crickets from family and friends when we need them most.
Yep.
And there's some other similar ones. Honestly, just not acknowledging what is happening and ghosting you. Yeah. To have the people that just disappear.
Yeah.
The people that don't say anything. Yeah. We as caregivers feel that. And we notice that. And that's really hurtful.
It is. And I don't expect, I get that like we're saying all these things like, don't say this and don't say this. And if you say this, it's hurtful. And so that might make someone be like, well, then I'm not going to say anything.
Right.
Right. And so here I want to make super clear that like, that's not really a good option either.
Right. And we'll get to that when we talk about some of the positive things.
Yeah.
And that can be kind of like, yeah.
Exactly. We'll give you some things you can say. But I will say that there are definitely people in my life that I have felt like the silence has been real loud. when it's like, okay, all these other people, this random person over here just sent me a little text to just say, I saw what's going on, thinking of you, whatever. And this person said nothing. And I know that it's probably because they're scared that they're going to say the wrong thing and they feel like they're not good at this kind of thing. But really, like, just send me a heart emoji. I don't care.
Right.
Something, you know? And so I think otherwise it can just feel like, are you on my side? Do you realize this is happening in my life? Any of that, you know? And so I think the crickets part it just keeps people, the discomfort keeps people from doing things. And I think that can feel extra hurtful. Yeah.
What about you? Do you have any examples from your own life of things that people have said that have been uniquely terrible?
You know, one I was thinking about was from like way back when he was first being diagnosed, and we had an old neighbor who said, and I think this happens a lot, said, well, so I was like, he had this and then where this is going to happen, it's this new diagnosis, blah, blah, blah. She said, well, you know, I once had a problem with my thyroid. And I was just like, what?
Yeah. Okay.
Like, what are we even talking about right now?
Right.
So I think that's another one, is this comparison thing.
Yeah.
We had this friend in college who would always be like, but for me in my life, right? And it's like that thing, like he would always flip it into be about his life. And so that thing, and I think people just get, again, they're trying to make connections and whatever. But for you to say, my husband just got this life altering diagnosis. And for you to say, I once had a thing that's like totally unrelated. Like it's different if you were like, oh, actually my cousin has that same disease. You might want to connect with them. Cool. But to be like, oh, you know what I had, or my friend's neighbor's sister's dog also one time had a thing, you know, like the comparison thing is just like, well, friends, that's not what if it's not directly helpful, then don't bring it up.
Right.
You know? So I think that's another category there, is the comparison piece. And I remember I can picture exactly where we were standing. And that was like 11 years ago.
Oh,
when she said that. So be real careful about that.
Yeah.
Because sometimes too, when you do those comparison things, then you're like, let's say like this person says, oh, I just got diagnosed with lymphoma. Oh, my sister had lymphoma. And then you say, how are they doing? Well, they died. Right. Not helpful. Right. Everybody's story is so different that like, unless it's like really going to be helpful, don't bring it up.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something else that just came to mind that we've talked about, and we talk about it a lot, is the ring theory of, you know, the caregiver and the patient center of the concentric rings. And, you know, you provide comfort inward to the people in closer rings that are closer to the center. And if you have things that are how it's affecting you, how like you feel about it, like that goes to a ring further out. And so like some of these things are definitely not things that should be moving inward. And I think also, not all of the time, but a lot of the time, I think these are coming from people that are several rings out, maybe. Like usually I would hope that the people that you have placed around you as like your next level of support get it and are, you know, doing better. But it's like these, like just breaking down that whole analogy and just jumping like way from an outside ring. Like I'm going to talk about how, it's really difficult for me when all you're doing is complaining about, you know, your life and things like that. And it's just like, no, that's not
right.
The right way to go.
Right.
And so to focus, maybe we can transition to talking about some of the positive things here, is to focus on like, when you, like, what can you say as you know, as directing care, directing comfort, directing, all of that to the person who's further in that circle than you.
Yeah, for sure. And I just want to sort of reiterate that I think that, you know, a couple things that happen when, like, let's say, you know, my neighbor comes to me and says, whoa, my husband just got this diagnosis. Some things that might be raised up in me if I'm the listener, right?
Okay, go for it.
So again, it feels super uncomfortable because like, I don't know what to say.
Right.
It makes me worry because I remember Kate Bowler talking about this once. You know, she had colon cancer and that people were like, well, does it run in your family? Did you eat a lot of meat? Like they were trying to like rationalize it to figure out, is it going to happen to me?
Yes.
Right. And so people want to know that kind of thing. And so if I say, well, Sean's is a rare genetic disease, people are sort of like, whew. So that's not another thing I need to add to my worry list. It's going to happen to me. Right. So I think there's the fear that it's going to happen to me. There's the discomfort about not knowing what to say. There's the just discomfort in general, right. of this conversation. And I think those are the things that lead to these sometimes well-meaning, but missing the mark things or the silence. Right.
Yeah.
And so again, if we can, I think one step is for the listener to acknowledge, like to pay attention to like, okay, what am I feeling in my body when I hear someone tell me this really hard thing?
Right.
And how can I work through that to be able to be supportive of them? And who do I have in a bigger circle than me?
Yes.
That later on I can go home and talk to my husband or my whoever and say, oh, I had this hard, it was really hard to visit my friend in the hospital today.
Yep.
And dump it on them.
Yep.
So it still gets dumped, but to really pay attention to what's going on in you when you're having those interactions. And I think that can be helpful.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to put it, that like to take what you're feeling and like, yeah, you can then find someone you can talk to about that and kind of work through that and learn like, okay, why do I feel that way? And, what is that telling me about myself and how I can, be better supportive. Yeah. Yeah. A lot can happen from the discomfort. And I think taking a beat it's one of those things again, to like think before you speak and not like, I'm uncomfortable. Let's say this thing. Let's, yeah.
Yeah. And even that, I mean, that's a good transition, because I think when you say just take a beat, think before you speak, that one of the things that we noticed as a pattern in the positive things people said was just presence.
Yeah.
With a CE at the end. Just being present. And so it's not even that someone's like needs you to immediately say something.
Right.
Like, I think if I said to someone, oh yeah, it's been a really hard week. Sean had a bunch of scans and we're nervous. If someone was just quiet for a minute, and even if they just acknowledge like, oh, I'm just taking that in and I'm just sitting with you in that, that would feel beautiful.
Yeah.
So I think that we too often feel like we have to have the right answer. We have to say something right away. And I think that the being present with someone and even saying, I don't have words. I don't have the right words, but I'm right here and I'm going to sit with you.
Yep.
It's beautiful.
It's huge.
Beautiful. And yeah. So presence was one of the sort of buckets that we saw that people appreciated, just being present. I'm just going to sit here with you.
Right.
Yeah. What's another one?
The other like big bucket for me was like acknowledgement and validation. So like one that when I read it, like really hit me was, I finally understand what you're going through.
Yeah.
And, I don't know the context of that completely, but it reads like something someone finally, or someone had in their life. Now they experience life as a caregiver and they're like, I have lived this now.
Yep.
And so I get, or I understand, or I know what you're facing. And to hear something like that as a caregiver, one, it's just there's a implicit acknowledgement of like the difficulty and the challenge and the hardship of this life. And it also just has this, when someone knows what you've gone through or has a similar experience, you can just jump to like really getting into it, or really just, it cuts through a lot of superficial stuff, and it's just like you're with your people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so like I can imagine hearing that and feeling like deeply moved and seen. And also like, it's one of those things, like I don't want people to have their loved ones get sick so that they understand my life as a caregiver. Right. There's that like, knowing back to them like, oh yeah, we're both here, and it's a terrible place that we're both in, but we're both here together. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I actually do know the context behind that. And she said that I could share. And essentially it was a person in her life who had been pretty judgy about the way she
she was taking care of her husband and about, some of the boundaries she had put up and about, things she was and wasn't able to do because she was now a caregiver. And then this person, the judgy one, became a caregiver herself and then called her up and was like, oh,
wow.
I get it.
Yeah.
I get it now. And so I think a thing that I wish though, because I think, this happens in parenting a lot, is like somebody will be super judgy about how you're parenting and then they have kids and they're like, oh,
right.
Right. And I wish that we could just be kind the first time around,
Yeah, right.
Because I hear that a lot from people who say, someone says, oh, now I get it.
Yeah.
And they can't really get it until they've done it. And it's true. Right.
Right.
And can we try?
Yeah.
Can we, is there
it doesn't have to
there?
take that. Yeah.
Right. And I don't know if that's the sympathy versus empathy thing, right? Like if empathy is if you've actually experienced it and sympathy is if you haven't, but like, I don't know, like I'm glad when that happens. And also it just feels like, really?
Right.
Come on. Could you have tried a little harder the first time around,
Yeah. A few others on the validation kind of acknowledgement ones that were great to hear. One of them was, he's doing so well, you did that.
Yeah.
Like
you did that.
Acknowledging the role as a caregiver in like helping the health of the person you're caring for, acknowledging the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
Another one, this really sucks, doesn't it?
Yep.
Just like, acknowledging that it's a rough situation. Of course you're sad, like acknowledging.
Yeah. Like, of course you are. Of course you're sad. Yeah.
You're doing a good job.
Yeah. Oh, like my shoulders just went down just hearing you read that. You're doing a good job. And I think of these when I was looking at them sort of like, so some of them are more like acknowledgement validation of like your feelings. And some are like affirmations even like that, like you're doing a good job. Like somebody said that they were like in a store and their son with special needs was having a meltdown and a stranger walked up and whispered, you're doing a really great job. Come on. Like, right. Or somebody said that her parents have dementia and she's caring for them. And people who know her parents said they would be really proud of you.
Right.
Like, so I think there's those affirmation pieces about like, wow, you're doing this, you're doing it.
Yep.
And then there's the acknowledgement of sort of like I hear you, like I acknowledge that this is really like, I hear you, I see you, I'm with you. I'm sorry this is happening, like just sort of saying like, whoa, that your life must be hard. And I'm saying that I see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have anything, I mean, I'm not even like specifically, but like just generically, like I said, when you just read, you're doing a good job, my shoulder's like, whew. Like, is there anything like that you feel like you can imagine if someone said it or when someone does say it to you that you're like, oh, I didn't realize I needed to hear that, Right.
I think it's, I mean, from a more generic standpoint, it's the acknowledging that I am a caregiver, acknowledging that this is a difficult thing, and asking how I am doing with that. Yep. And I remember feeling this a lot early on where people would ask how Sarah was doing. And I remember really noticing who was asking how I was doing with that.
Yeah.
Because I think that, I don't know if it changes as time goes on, but it felt like, because it's this new thing, Sarah is sick. What's going on with Sarah? How is she doing? What treatments are she doing? Yep. How's she responding to this? And like, one, that's great. That you're interested, I appreciate that you care about her and are curious in what's going on. And, sometimes now it swings to the way where, where I notice when people don't ask how she's doing.
Yeah.
Because it's just like, well, that's just, she's sick. That it feels like people are just like, well, that's just how it is. And so,
why ask? Right.
Why ask? Which you can still ask.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when all of the questions are about the person who is sick and none of the questions are about how the caregiver is doing in light of all of that.
Yep.
So like the times that people asked about me, the times that people were curious about me and wanted to know what they could do for me. Those are the ones that those really jump out as positive, really meaningful things.
Yeah. I'm thinking, remembering a story you told about at one point during the pandemic, and it was like a bunch of your friends got together for breakfast or something.
Right.
And then they said, we know you can't come, but if you'd like to put an order, we'll bring it to you. Or so, is that right?
That did happen.
And just, just like all the acknowledgement, like, because also part of that is like, they were thinking of you.
Right.
That's huge. I mean, I think that's a bucket. It's just like having a random person. Like, I think I've told you before, we have this amazing friend who lives a couple blocks away, and sometimes just like an ice cream shop gift card comes flying through our mailbox, and it's on a regular day. It's not even like during a crisis time, or I open the front door and there's a bag of my favorite potato chips on the steps, so just like, oh, she was thinking of me, so I think the thinking of you part is so huge too, because it can feel so isolating and lonely. And so to have someone be like, I'm thinking of you, and then for them to take the next step of, and we'd love to bring you breakfast to let us know.
Right.
Like, that's awesome, Because I think another theme we saw was offers, right?
Yes, exactly.
And so what are some of those things that people can do? And remember, it's not just the like, let me know, but like concrete offers.
Right. Like one of these is, I'm planning a fun night out for you. I'll pick you up at 4 tomorrow. Like there's so much like work that like you hear that from a friend. Yeah. And like there's so much work that they've done for you.
Right.
And I like that's, not every caregiver can hear that and be like, oh, I can actually get away.
Right.
But I'm assuming that that in this, the context is that the person planning this like understands, that kind of thing. But to have someone's like, hey, I want to spend time with you. I want to give you a fun experience. I'm planning it. Like, I will pick you up.
Yeah.
Like, that's like, it's not giving the caregiver anything.
Yeah.
To do as far as like preparing and planning and all of that. It's just like, that's a great one.
I think one thing I'll say with that is just to think about like that. For most caregivers, there would be a lot of work on the back end that would have to happen with that. And so like you said, you'd have to know because it would be like, oh, do I need to get coverage? And do I need to, blah, 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 you know what I mean? And so just to be aware so that people don't start doing that. But
it could be, hey, I've got some, I don't know, can I bring over a picnic and we can have dinner on your deck tomorrow? Will that work?
Yes, exactly.
It doesn't have to be, heading out for the night kind of thing.
Totally.
But where the person has thought through, like, here's a thing that I can plan. And with minimal work required from the caregiver's part.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yep. Another one along that line, someone said, it wasn't something they said, it was something they did. They pulled together with others to help us financially when our grant money ran out. And so that's, we've had that over the years too, people putting together a fundraiser or this or that. And it's just like, again, them doing the work, like seeing a need and doing the work is huge. Huge. Yeah. So I think if we think about this this whole episode is for our supporters, right? Usually we talk about supporters at the end, but is to sort of summarize, to think about when you have a caregiver in your life and either they're right in front of you or you're hearing, kind of what's going on, to number one, pay attention to like what that is bringing up in you. And to, if you can, put that aside for a minute. And make it not about you, but about them. To avoid doing things that are minimizing, that are downplaying, dismissive, bright-siding, comparing, missing the mark, right? Too sort of short and sweet and empty, right? Like avoid those things. Avoid saying nothing, even if you're sort of uncomfortable. But instead lean in and think about the buckets of acknowledging them, validating them, maybe providing an offer of some sort, just being present, affirming them in what they're doing, and just, letting them know that you see them, that they matter, and that they don't have to be huge things.
Right.
I have a friend who sort of coined this term for me that I now love, is that it was especially during Sean's radiation that he would send me these text messages all the time. I know today is another day of radiation, thinking of you, no need to respond.
Yeah.
And I would just be like, oh, thank you. Right. But it would just be these messages. And that meant everything to me. And it took him probably 20 seconds and made my day. So to sort of take those things in supporters and think about how you can show up for the caregivers. And I think you bring up something too about the long-term caregivers. Like you're like, people don't always ask anymore. Right.
Yeah.
So this is not just your friends who are caregivers in crisis, like in like new crisis.
Right.
But think about us old timers over here as well, who like, just because we're like years and years and years into this doesn't mean it's easy.
Yeah.
And so to not forget about us as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's a good summary. And I think it's a good exercise to go through, kind of a bunch of concrete examples of what's good, what's not good, and kind of, how we can all, because I'm sure I've said things in the past too.
Oh, for sure. We all have.
That missed.
Yep.
And so I think what you said earlier about like, okay, don't dwell on the fact that if one of these bad examples was you, maybe not specifically, but like don't dwell on that. Like, that happened. Okay. What can you do going forward?
Yep. And I think it does a world of good if this feels appropriate to go back and say like, I listened to this podcast and I realized that the other day I said this thing to you and that was probably not helpful. And I just want, you know what I mean? Like if you feel comfortable with that, I think that repair work can feel really lovely. And I think I've had people do that where I was like, oh, I didn't even think about any of that. But it feels really good for me to know that they were thinking about it later.
Yep.
So you can go back and fix it, or you can just like think about moving forward. Another quick thing, if I may just make a quick plug, is that, I have these caregiver gift boxes.
Right.
And in those, like I've done the work.
Yeah.
Right. I've done the work of like, I have the letter in there. I have the poem in there. It says all over it, you're part of the story. And so the only thing you have to do is figure out what the gift note says. And you could just write, love me if you want or whatever. And so if you really are feeling like, I want to do something, but I don't have the words, that's one way to sort of let me do the work of that, but you get the credit and you can show up for your friend. And so if you just go to thenegativespace.life, you'll see a spot where it says caregiver gifts and you can check out what those boxes look like. But that's just another way to show up for friends. If you're really feeling like, I don't have good words, you can let me be the one using the words for you. So yeah.
Good.
All right. Well, I hope that all of us can go through our weeks with having pleasant interactions with others.
Yeah.
And giving grace to those who are still learning. But that we can also be models of how to really show up for caregivers and support each other. So, yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah. And thanks to everybody who reached out to us and let us use your stories today. It was good to hear from all of you and we appreciate it very much.
Absolutely.
We know your time and energy are valuable. So thank you for taking time to write to us.
All right. Well, it's been a good conversation.
Yeah.
Always great to talk to you, Allison.
Yeah, you too. We'll talk to you later.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. You've been listening to In Sickness. Find us online at insickness.care or on Instagram at insicknesspodcast. You can send your questions and comments to insicknesspodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or fellow caregiver, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and take care.